Welcome back to the garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. This is a series of detailed tour videos where we're showing off how plants have responded to our installing them over the last 1, 2, or 3 years that this project has been underway. This video is going to start off on the west side of the property back here with what is a temporary fence, and I've been saying it's a temporary fence for a long time, so I'm going to get some flack for not having done this fence yet. But it is on the list, and we're gonna rearrange a couple of things based on that fence going in. I have managed to push back ivy and other things that were on. There's about 2.5, maybe even 3 feet beyond this temporary fence of property here, and so some of the things, some of the bigger things here are going to jump to that side. It's going to give us the opportunity to put in a few more things, but this area has been extremely challenging. Normally in Raleigh, we have just a red clay soil. We're in the Piedmont of North Carolina, and from Richmond, Virginia down to North Alabama, there is just red clay through a big span just east of the mountains or south of the mountains there. And that's our normal soil to work in. It's hard to dig in, but it usually retains moisture pretty well. It's very nutrient rich, and the plants love it. Somehow or another, there's a foot of sand back here. And so that's what we've been planting in. We've got tree roots on the other side of it. There's a southern magnolia, a native southern magnolia growing on the other side. I need to cut it back just a hair. But between it and a giant oak back here and other things, there's roots in here and sand. And that combination has made it very difficult to find plants that will grow in here. And so this spot's been a struggle, but things are starting to break through. And once they do break through, they've doing okay because we've improved the soil. We've improved the soil quite a bit over that amount of time. So jumping in, this hydrangea is called Big Daddy, and again, it's one of these plants that hasn't thrived as much as it would have if it had the water that it wanted. But look at the size of this inflorescence. At the old house, I had them about this big, and I expect that next year, this thing's finally breaking through. It looks fresh. It's got new growth. I think next year I'll get the big, giant inflorescences that Big Daddy is famous for. But this is great hydrangea. Again, it's one I've had at the old house and this house. And I've got more coming, and so maybe some of these will end up being that big. But these I've seen as big as basketball size inflorescences on these. A little bit of pink here, a little bit of blue here, so I'm also missing some aluminum in this soil compared to just 20 feet away in the clay over there. They're blue, blue, blue. There's a rue planted very, very close to it that needs to be moved, and it's actually in a bit of a wilt, but it'll get moved somewhere. There's a rhododendron, which are pretty good at competing with tree roots. This is a Southern Living Plant Collection one, the Southgate. I can't remember which one of them it is. There's a series of rhododendron that this Southern Living Plant Collection has that are more heat tolerant. And I've seen them all the way down at the Hammond Research Station in South Louisiana growing fantastic. I mean, that's how heat tolerant these actually are. Turns out they're not tolerant of trees and sand trying to kill them. But it's finally broken through as well, and it's put on a little bit of growth this year. Last year, it just looked miserable back here. I think next year it'll come out and actually, but it was a recovery process for that one. This is a prostrate plum. This is one of the great plants for dry shade conditions. If you have dry shade conditions and you're in the South, you can't miss with this plant. Very slow growing, ground cover like evergreen shrub. Virtually every tour video we do that has root competition in the shade here in the South has these planted somewhere. They're just that good. But again, kind of slow growing, and it costs you a couple extra dollars when something is slow growing, so keep that in mind. That's the reason why. This is an Aucuba japonica that is ours. It's one that I found that just has some speckling in a green variety, so it's not all that interesting overall, but it is a pretty plant, right? It's very compact. So, this is our selection. Haven't given it a name yet. I'll probably take some cuttings on it this year, and maybe we'll give it a name and give some away or sell some here, or whatever, recoup our money. We won't try to make a profit on them probably, but just try to get a few out into the world if you're interested in these Aucubas. And again, it's just an interesting green variety that has some speckling in it and a really compact habit. And it's done, this is another plant that's just great in dry shade. There's a very overgrown Camellia sasanqua right here. This is another one from my nursery. It was put here with the intent that the fence would be done and it would be on the back line. That hasn't happened, so it's out of place now. It's big, and I'm probably just gonna do a little bit of pruning on it. I'm just gonna continue to leave it here until that project's done, and then it's just gonna drop right behind the Aucuba, back behind there. There's some clown flowers planted occasionally back here, and we walked away from them, haven't given them a whole lot of water. The ones you'll see in the front garden are taller and bigger and fuller already because they got a little bit more water, but these have been watered today. I expect, you know, by the end of the season, they'll be about this big. Pollinators love these, and they're great shade annuals. The Pieris japonica right here, this is mountain snow. We had temple bells in the first video, which is also a white flowering Pieris japonica. This one is said to be far more heat tolerant, and it's actually done quite well back here in this dry shade. Initially, it took a bit of a shock. It was a shock to us, and we didn't do well, you know, responding to the fact that things were dry back here initially, and that stunted them. But since then, you know, it's come back out of it beautifully. It bloomed fantastic earlier in the season. It's put on some new reddish growth that they're kind of famous for, and then, you know, it's filled in beautifully. Looks great. There is a Chinese mayapple back here. The mayaples would definitely like to be in wetter conditions, so we're going to probably move these back up toward the porch. But that's the Chinese mayapple. We've got the native mayapple over here. Of course, we're right near the end of the season for them. They bloomed a few weeks back, and these spring ephemerals, as they're known, you know, come up in the spring, bloom, and then retreat during the heat of the summertime. There's a Hosta out on the front of the bed. That one's called Fashionista, and it's starting to put some new growth on right there in the center. A lot of these Hosta, again, are not one that really would like the dry shade all that much. This Pulmonaria, though, is doing absolutely fantastic. This one's called Silver Bouquet. It has this beautiful silver center on the leaves and green edges. And if you've seen these Pulmonaria bloom, they have pink and purple flowers on the same plant. Really, really interesting. It looks like there's two different flowers. It looks like two different plants just kind of growing together. So, but it's performed extremely well back here. So this is also a test site for us in a way, where we can see the things that are really performing quite well back here. This hellebore is called Penny's Pink, and boy does it put on a show when it's in bloom. You can see how many flowers it actually had. Believe it or not, I cut this thing back to the ground as the new growth was coming up on it this spring, and so it flowered with none of this foliage. And then all of this has happened in the last 2 months or so after it flowered, but it was long flowered, and even the spent flowers are kind of nice. Hellebore's fantastic in the dry shade. We know that about them. No problem at all with those. Once you get them in and watered and settled in place, they'll compete with the best of them in dry shade conditions. Got one Aspidistra here. This is the first of the ones you'll see. This one's called Rawhide, and it's a speckled one. It'll get taller here over the next month or so. We had to cut all of our cast iron plants back completely. Normally, at the end of winter, we just selectively prune out the kind of tattered and old leaves off of them. But that December freeze really made virtually every leaf look bad, so we've just cut them all to the ground. You'll see several others coming back from that in just a minute. Down here, there's a Dremeopsis, which is a really neat little plant. Starting to flower now. Seems to have hit the ground running. Beautiful spotted foliage on that one. This Hosta is blue ivory. This is the third year in the ground, and it is grown a little bit, but it's actually probably a hair smaller at this point than it was last year. It's wider, it's got more bibs that have come up, but the actual height and size of the leaves is actually smaller. Again, it's an indication that, you know, you're under watering, or you got it in an area that just can't support you know, a hosta. We have these begonias that have come back 3 years in a row as perennials. Kind of unexpected, but for some reason back here, begonias all come back. It's probably this winter protection of having this canopy over the top of them. There are several hellebores here. I think these are blue diamond. Again, just industrial in these shady conditions. They bloomed like mad for a long, long time, and continue to look great back here with the new foliage coming out on them. This Mahonia is Marvel Mahonia. This one had, if you followed the channel back in December, January, had flower clusters on it this big. That December freeze did nothing to it, and it just proceeded to bloom right after that freeze like it never happened. Then on some of our pruning videos earlier this year, it was this tall, and I cut it down to here trying to fill it out a bit. Any place I'm getting this new growth coming, every single one of these spots that are pushing new growth up through it will have a flower cluster on it in the winter, and they're this big, and the pollinators go crazy for them. Any warm day in January, this thing is absolutely covered in bees, which is kind of fun. There's a big Illicium back here, and this Illicium went through a please water me every day for 6 months. And we thought we were gonna have to move it. Somehow it got rooted in here well enough where now it never needs water. It hasn't even blinked you know, this whole year, or even the second half of last year. It looks great back here. Really is going to be a great backdrop to other things as we, again, this fence goes in and we remodel this bed just a bit, take some of the things out that obviously need more water, continue to add some things in here that will take less water. There are a couple of Lamium. There's one purple flowering here, one white flowering up there where Steph is. And they're doing pretty well. This Farfugium, this is the giant Farfugium. Before this season is over, it'll have leaves up about this big and some quite a bit bigger than what's on here. These don't bloom until fall, and they'll bloom with these beautiful yellow flowers in October, November. This thing was still blooming in December when the December freeze happened, and it got nuked, literally melted to the ground that night, and has just come flying back up out of the ground from that. So it had no long-term impact on it whatsoever. There are a couple Rhodia japonicas down here, and they actually need to be cut back. I'm just going to cut them back to the ground like I've done the Aspidistras that are back here. They're a little bit rough looking, mostly from that freeze. They have a little bit of rust too, but new foliage is coming on them, but I think I'm just going to reset them, and I think they'll be happier for it. This hosta is called Island Breeze. You start to get a little bit away from where it's so dry up there, and that one looks quite a bit better. It's only been in the ground for a little while, and it's definitely looking pretty good. This is another Aspidistra that we cut back. I missed another one or two up there as well that are on their way back. This one's called Stripes. As you can see, it has stripes. Clever name for it. There's a soft caress Mahonia in this container. This wouldn't have been part of our container videos. I'm not talking about containers in this series of videos because we literally just did videos on showing them off a few weeks ago, but this one wasn't in it. This soft caress Mahonia in the pot, in the container, is just fantastic. Again, these Mahonia bloom in the wintertime when nothing else is blooming, and if you get a warm day, the pollinators really love them. This is a Camellia japonica from the Southern Living Plant Collection. Actually, these two Mahonia are as well. This is one of the coolest Camellia japonicas you'll ever see. It is a fall bloom. It starts in the fall. It's actually the longest blooming camellia we have by months. This thing it's the earliest flowering camellia we have and the latest flowering camellia we have. So it will start blooming. Last year, I think we had a flower on it right toward the end of September. I remember doing an Instagram post for it. And of course, the December freeze knocked it back quite a bit, but it kept some of the buds alive and still was blooming in February, and into March it still had one or two on it. The year before that, it was blooming well into February or March, but December knocked it back a bit. But man, what a great plant. I mean, it's the longest blooming camellia that I've ever owned. We have a couple containers on the shed back here. This one has some winged begonias in it, some polka dot plant, some Everillo carex, and it's being eaten by this grapevine called razzmatazz, which I planted on the corner, and I've wanted to run it up along the top edge and along the top edge of the front. and I just haven't taken the time to put that control on it. So I've got to come in here and pull it off of the building and then retie it up where I actually want to keep it, and then cut back the parts I don't. Right now it's absolutely full of grapes, and so I'm gonna wait until the grapes mature and the birds take them, because that's who's getting these grapes. These grapes are awesome. They're little tiny seedless grapes. They're very, very tasty, but the birds are gonna beat you to them unless I put some sort of cover or screen over top of it, which they can have them. You know, I'll eat different grapes, but great plant. It's been very vigorous, no problems with it. It had aphids for like a few days last year, and then something came along and ate the aphids, and you know, got a free meal out of that. This is an Illicium called Florida Sunshine. So this is the second Illicium in this video, and I think the fifth Illicium that we will have shown, this being the fourth video in this series of videos. So we very fond of our native and non-native Illicium. They're great because you know, you don't get any pest problems on them. You know, if you break the leaf on it, it smells like licorice. This one, as you can see, is very, very showy. This one's not grown for flowers. The others have white flowers or pink flowers or red flowers. And they're amongst the oldest lineage of flowering plants on earth. Really, really amazing, interesting flowers on them. But again, this one will flower, but it's not being grown for that. It's just being grown for the chartreuse pop of color. This is a very dark corner in the garden, but you can see this thing from a mile away. We have a ground cover rose right here from the Southern Living Plant Collection. It's called It's a Breeze. It's already gone through one full blooming, and Steph came back here and gave it a haircut. It'll flush back out and bloom again. Great disease-resistant red, a red rose, and that's the reason it was picked, because of its size and also its disease resistance. We've got it in probably a hair more shade than it would like, so it's stretching a bit. So when it ends up putting on this much growth to flower. Okay, if I had it out in the sun, in full sun, it would only grow, you know, it would grow more compact and then flower. So what it's doing for us is stretching and then flowering just as well as it would flower in the sun, but then we're having to prune it. No big deal overall. We had a rosemary in the third video that got really severely hurt from the winter cold. This Chef's Choice rosemary did not get hurt as bad. It's in a slightly more protected space, probably a little less light than it would like to have, but it's putting on lots of new growth. It looks great. At some point, I might give this a really kind of hard haircut and let it flush back out from that. I'll do it though when conditions are favorable for rosemary, you know, hot and dry, which is kind of what they love. There's a red vein sorrel. We plant these red vein sorrel in lots of places in the garden. So they're in containers, they're near, you know, other plants. They're in our annual border in the first video, if you saw that. They're just great, interesting plant. The rosemary's eaten this one a little bit, but it's not having any problem competing with it. There's another sage. We have lots of Salvia officinalis out here in the garden, which can be, you know, it's the herb sage, plus it, you know, you get this added benefit of these great flowers for the pollinators. That Cryptomeria back there is called Dragon Prince. You'll see another one in a container in the front garden when we get out to the front garden. That's one of the longest planted plants in this garden. So it's 3 years, hair more than 3 years in the ground at this point, and it's performed beautifully back here. Again, it's probably in a little more shade than it would like to be in, but look how nice that conifer is, and it's super soft to the touch, you know, which I kind of like. There's a little Camicyparis we planted from a little 4-inch pot right here called Thowil. It'll put on some growth this year, and it's surrounded by some dianthus. Those dianthus have just become perennials out here. We planted dianthus 2 years ago in a few spots, and they keep coming back for us. So, and I think that Heucherella back in the back, I think that's Alabama Sunrise. Yeah, it's Alabama Sunrise. It's blooming right now. We let that one get a little bit dry. We've not watered, and then not really thinking about it because we've had some rain here and there, but we've had a lot of wind this season. And even right now while we're shooting this, it's pretty breezy out here. And so whatever rain we're getting seems to be evaporating very, very quickly from just a dry breeze that we're getting every day. So we've had to come in here and do a little watering right here at the beginning of June. But that was kind of nice. We didn't have to up until now, but you know, you're finding things that you underwatered drastically. I wish I would have started maybe a week or two earlier. The shed sits in the northwest corner of the property, and that's where we've come along the west side, and now we're at the northwest side, and we're going to go along the north fence behind the vegetable garden back there and show you some dahlias in just a minute. This hydrangea was planted in a video just a week or two ago. That's called Miss Seori. Beautiful, beautiful hydrangea. It's not going to perform at its peak the first time when I put it in the ground. If you put something in the ground that's in full flower like this, it's going to slow the flowering down. So I probably should just go ahead and take them off completely. It would probably actually help that plant quite a bit, because they're not enjoyable. It's not having a good time, and it's not like that's showing off like it will in the future. It's one of my absolute favorite hydrangeas. If you have a chance to grab one of those, I absolutely would. Catmint, I mean, is just such a great performer in the garden. It's just hard to miss with catmint. You've got a plant that the rabbits won't eat, the deer won't eat, flowers like crazy. It covers the ground, so that's a spot I don't have to mulch. And it's in that mint family, so again, nothing eats it. And pollinators are on it all day long. We're shooting this in the evening, so we're missing our bees. Our bees would be part of the party here, but they've gone to sleep at this point. We do our potatoes in potato bags. If you followed along with the channel, they are starting to decline. So these were put in March. They've grown like crazy for a while. They've come to flower. We've had a good run with these. I think last year our potatoes had already died back to the bags. It got so hot so quick. This year it's been cooler and it's allowed for more growth. So I'm expecting these bags to be pretty full with potatoes, but I'm probably still another couple weeks before we need to let this foliage die completely back to the bags. So I'm expecting another 2 to 3 weeks for that to happen. The first plant that was planted as part of the project here, the building went in, mostly cleanup happened, wood chips went down, compost was added, vegetable garden was started, and then the very first shrub that went in was this October Magic Ruby Camellia. This is one of Bobby Green's great camellias. This Southern Living Plant Collection one. We've got October Magic Ruby. We've got several of the Southern Living Plant Collection camellias out here. Ruby's one of my absolute favorites. You'll see it's one of the few plants we have two of. You're going to see another one in the next video. But a red semi-double or double flower starts blooming in September. Blooms September, October, November, December. If it has any buds left on it, right into early January, depending on how cold it is outside. The other basket on the front of the building has portulaca in it, because we forget to water these pretty frequently, and the sun hits this one pretty hard. Portulaca is the way to go if you think you're going to abuse something. This hydrangea paniculata was one that Dr. Durr gave us on a visit down there filming with him. We have 3 hydrangeas in the garden, 2 hydrangea macrophylla that were in the second video, and this one in the 4th video. This is a paniculata or panicle hydrangea. Every one of these ends has a flower cluster that will open up in the next few weeks. These have all their flower parts, so the pollinators really love these. I've turned it into a tree form, as you can see. It actually needs to be staked better right this minute, but it's looking good, and it's about to really be showing off here in the maybe about 2 more weeks on the panicle hydrangeas. I think we probably had panicle hydrangeas in full bloom at this point last year. They love the heat and the hot, and they get going pretty quickly, but for some reason this one is, I know it's nighttime temperatures have been cool. More potato bags back here, and then we have this fig that we're going to move. It's just too big for this space. Haven't really decided where it's going to go. It may actually be rehomed to a neighbor or something like that. But I'm going to cut the roots on it. These are very hard to move. So somebody's screaming at this video already, you can't move that thing will be too hard to move. I've moved them before, so I've been through this. They root extremely well out into the surrounding area. But if I have to, I'll dig around larger roots and I'll saw them. I'll use a hand saw or some sort of electric saw and actually saw them off. And believe it or not, because I cut it back, I can saw these roots off about where the drip line is. and transplanted. It won't miss a beat. These figs are just very industrial. In the northeast corner of the back garden, we have a couple different gingers growing. One of them we got from Bobby Green. We admired it in his garden down in Fairhope, Alabama. And before you knew it, he literally took a shovel out and chopped a piece out of the ground. We threw it in the back of the car, and we abused it for a week, another week on the road, got it home, planted it, and it's done fantastic. We have another one that Ram Giberson gave us, and it's one or the other, I can't remember. Steph knows, but I don't. One of them came from Ram and Tom's garden down in Athens, Georgia, and the other one came from Bobby Green. This is Steph's absolute favorite weed and one of our absolute worst weeds in the city of Raleigh. This is porcelain vine. Porcelain vine grows through any and everything. The birds deposit these seeds, and while they're sitting on a shrub or something, so the seed has something to grow on, it comes up right through a plant. So it's a constant battle out here. You see porcelain vine sticking up through everything. It's one of the weeds this is probably our worst overall weed in the garden, just because it always has such a foothold before you see it. It's always 3 feet tall up at the top of the, it's literally growing at the top of these, 6 foot tall gingers that are in the corner. It blooms, and then it has a beautiful berry. Full credit to this vine. It's called porcelain berry for a reason. Beautiful, beautiful berry. Horrible, horrible weed though, it is. Our dahlias, we moved to the back line. We have bluebirds in the bluebird house over there, and so I'm trying, I got as close as the fig on the other side, and then we jumped to this side so we're not right up against them. This is our second group of bluebirds this season in the house, and they just don't like you that close to it. So we're gonna stay away from them and just show you some of these dahlias that you can see right now, and they're all interesting. These are seedling dahlias that we do here at the house. These make crosses. We collect the seed. We start the seed in the winter, in the late winter, and then we plant them out and get interesting new varieties every year. The bees absolutely love these. They've got all the flower parts exposed in the middle, and so they have happy home there. Some of the hybrid dahlias, and I've said this a bunch of times, they just absolutely can't get to the middle of those flowers. And so they'll struggle and try, but these flowers are easy. I see ones on the other side of the fence over there has a bee just resting on it right now. So there you go. There's the fourth tour. There's the centerpiece in the middle of the back garden will be the fifth part of this kind of master tour of the garden, and it's probably one of the more complete pieces in the garden. We're not waiting for something. We're not moving anything. It's kind of settled and finished. So you'll see that in the next video. Thanks for watching.